Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. My name is Ivana Harinkyu if you're new here, and if you're not, thank you for coming back. Today is Friday, January the 7th, and today we're going to talk about something that actually is going to happen next week. Now, I know that we could talk about this on Monday, but I think everybody is going to be a little bit more involved in football coverage on Monday than wanting to talk about the Alabama legislature. But the legislature is a big deal, and that starts on Tuesday. So we're going to get ahead of it a little bit here and tell you what you need to know about this upcoming session, some of the pre-filed bills, and just kind of what the importance of this session is. Today, I am joined by our Capitol reporter, Mike Cason. Mike is here today to kind of go over some of the things I talked about and also talk about how this session is arguably maybe more important because this is a big election year for our Alabama politicians. So, Mike, thank you for joining me today. Again, thanks for coming a little bit early. And normally we would do this on Monday, but I think that people are going to be a little preoccupied then.
Yeah, I think so. I think everybody's attention will be focused on that game. But yeah, they're cranking up Tuesday.
Right. Well, and I know, you're an Auburn fan, so I know that Monday is going to be a normal day for you. But,
not really normal. I'm very interested in the game, but
Tuesday is a big day though, right? The legislature starts on Tuesday, and this is a little bit odd because normally the legislature starts a little bit later. We're typically seeing it in February, maybe early March. So right at the beginning of January, the session starting is already a little bit odd. And that kind of sets the stage for just an odd year in the legislature. So tell us why we're starting so early this year.
Well, it's set in the Constitution. The Constitution that says when the legislative session starts during each of the 4 years in the 4-year cycle. I'm not sure why it starts earlier this year, but I'm sure there was a reason for making it that way. This is an election year, so the primary is May 24th. So legislators will probably want to get wrapped up a little early this year and go back to campaign in their districts.
You mentioned it's an election year, and that cannot be understated because this is an election year for everybody, right? Every seat in the legislature is up for reelection. I know that you and I were speaking earlier, and you said a lot of people are running for reelection, some are not. But either way, there's going to be a race for each of these seats. So that's a big election year in Alabama.
It is. It is. And yeah, as you said, most of the incumbents, most of the current office holders are running, not all. But yeah, it's a big deal, and it has some influence on what they'll do this session. Generally, they don't do as much. They have to pass the budgets, but generally they don't do as much in an election year.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that because last year in the last session, we had many different bills and many different things come up that were really hot topics just culturally, right? Now, this year, I know that you said we might not see as many of those hot button issues, but there are some bills that have been pre-filed that are dealing with some kind of controversial issues, right? So I want to talk about some of those. Let's first talk about one that I think is going to be a big talker for people, and that is a bill that's pre-filed here in Alabama that is similar to that Texas abortion bill that we have seen. So tell us a little bit about that bill and what's expected there.
Yes, that bill is, as you said, similar to the Texas abortion bill. That I believe the enforcement mechanism is that citizens file lawsuits to block if there's an abortion after the period where the baby's heartbeat can be heard. I think is the way that works. I hope I'm getting that right. But yeah, there is a bill filed for that in Alabama, pre-filed. That was not in the House Republican caucus introduced their agenda this week. That was not on the list. The only abortion thing they had on the list was a resolution to encourage the Supreme Court to uphold the Mississippi abortion bill, Mississippi abortion law, which is the big case pending before the U.S. Supreme Court. And as you know, Alabama passed almost a total ban on abortion 2 years ago, or in 2019, and it's on. The courts have that on hold. But I'm not sure how the legislature will proceed on abortion legislation this year. But as I said, that was not in the House Republican agenda.
So it has been pre-filed, not on the agenda yet. And again, that could have something to do with, you mentioned that Mississippi case currently at the US Supreme Court. A lot of these abortion bills are kind of on hold, or these abortion even laws are kind of on hold while the Supreme Court looks at that case. So surely to be a big talker there. Now, I also want to mention gambling. So casinos, lottery, that has been something that has been on the minds of many Alabamians for years. And that was something that actually came pretty close to being passed last year. Now, a lot of people, that was probably one of the closest that they've seen it in quite a while getting passed. So do we expect that bill and that issue to come up again in this session?
Yes, it'll come up. Senator Greg Albritton, who's the chairman of the General Fund and the committee in the Senate, he's working on a bill. He said it'll be very similar to the one last year, which had a lottery, casinos, and sports betting, and would set up a statewide gambling regulatory commission. The Senate President Pro Tem Greg Reed said he thinks it'll get serious consideration in the Senate, but in the House, the leadership does not seem as enthusiastic about gambling legislation this year. And House Speaker Mac McCutcheon said, well, the same obstacles that blocked it last year are still in place. And he said he thinks it's less likely to pass something like that during an election year. So it looks like it may be in trouble if it gets to the House.
And that is something that I think a lot of people are kind of picking up on, saying, look, are we not going to have any big passings or any big issues happening because it's an election year? Because then we know that politicians are going to have to go back on their campaign trails, go back to their districts and defend their choices. So what have you seen in the past? I know you've covered the legislature for a long time. What have you seen in the past during these election years? Do we typically not see as much done because of that reason?
I think that is the case. I can't really rely on my memory to say that definitively has happened, the last 3 or 4 election years, but I think that's generally the case. They have to pass the budgets, which is a pretty big undertaking. They usually work on that throughout the session. But yeah, I think they're less likely to, like, for example, 4 years ago, they had considered the gasoline tax increase for a couple of years. That had been in the works for several years, came kind of close to passing, but never did, and sort of gathered support. And then they didn't try it during the last election year. And then they came back the first year of this 4-year cycle and passed it. So that's an example of something that was put off until after the election year.
And I think that that's something that probably most people would maybe expect or understand when you said it, but is also a little bit frustrating to voters to think that their representatives and the people that they elect in the legislature are kind of pushing those topics down the road a little bit.
Yeah, I can see why that would bother voters. And to be clear, that's not, legislators aren't saying, well, we're going to put everything off, but I think, practically speaking, some of that certainly happens.
Right. Now, I want to talk again about some of these bills that have been pre-filed, but also what's on the agenda. So you mentioned that GOP agenda that you have seen earlier in our conversation. So what else is on that agenda to take up?
The first bill they had on that list is one that would repeal the requirement to buy a permit to carry a concealed pistol or to carry a handgun in your car or in your vehicle. That bill's been around for probably a decade, maybe more, and has passed the Senate several times. It's never passed the House. Law enforcement has opposed it. As sheriffs and police come down to the state house, speak at public hearings saying, we want to keep this permit requirement in place because people have to go through a background check, and they think it's a public safety issue. But that opposition to repealing the permit seems to have faded, and now you have the Republican caucus in the House for the first time, I believe, has endorsed the bill. There's more than one bill to repeal that permit requirement, so that signals it's likely to pass, since it's passed the Senate previously, and the Republican caucus has 3/4 of the seats in the House, so it looks likely that it will pass this year.
And that's a big deal. That is something that affects a lot of people in our state.
I think it is a big deal. And those proponents of this bill say, look, people are still going to buy a pistol. This doesn't say you can't buy a pistol permit. And they say in other states, people have continued to buy permits because of because of reciprocity agreements with other states. They can, drive into another state and still legally carry their pistol. But yeah, it's a big deal. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of debate about it. There's still going to be opposition to it from law enforcement. There's been a big dispute in Mobile where the Mobile County Sheriff has convinced the county commission down there to pass a resolution opposing efforts to repeal the permit. So it'll be one of the biggest issues this session.
Well,
and one thing that proponent maybe going too deep into the weeds on this, but last year another pistol permit bill was passed, and it was backed by law enforcement, and it allowed people to buy a lifetime permit, and it also they said made more uniform the background check process that happens in each county, sort of standardized that, and it also instructed the state to set up a database of people who prohibited from carrying weapons because they've committed a felony or for some other reason. And some of the people who have come around to supporting repealing the permit say, well, if we have this database for people who can't carry guns, that's going to be an important tool for law enforcement. And that sort of helps offset some of the safety concerns about taking away the permit requirement. That's the argument it's been made.
And I'm sure some of the concerns about taking away that permit just means is that people can get those guns and carry them and not have to go through any of those checks and balances that are required when you apply for that concealed carry permit.
Right. And then but then the argument that people who say you're infringing on my constitutional rights by making me buy a permit, and it's not serving that great a purpose because the criminals are not going to get a permit anyway. They're not a person who wants to commit a crime with a gun is not going to go get a pistol permit. So that's the other argument about that.
Right. We also have questions on medical marijuana. So we know that was passed last year. We know that there has been several different kind of important dates, right, with medical marijuana. Some of them are a little bit later this year. So we know that that's already been through the legislative process, but can you just update us on where that stands?
Yes. A commission was set up to start implementing that law and get that industry up and running. They hired an executive director who I guess is probably in the process of hiring a staff. And there are some dates in place when they can start issuing licenses. I believe it's in September. They can start issuing licenses, and there'll be licenses for cultivators, manufacturers, dispensaries, transporters. So they've got to issue all these licenses. And the expectation is that there'll be products available sometime in 2023 because they won't even have plants in the ground until probably late this year. And this is entirely, the industry will be entirely within Alabama. So there, as I said, probably be sometime next year before we have products in the dispensaries.
Now, a couple of other topics that are on the agenda this year, I should say at least pre-filed this year, are issues regarding critical race theory and that being taught in classrooms, and also one that was very controversial last year, and that is medical treatment for transgender minors. So give us a little bit of an update on those two situations and where they stand right now.
Critical race theory, a bill to say that teachers in public schools cannot teach critical race theory or I forgot exactly what the language was, similar divisive type, what they call divisive type teachings. That is part of the House Republican agenda. So I would expect they'll pass that early in the session. I would expect the Democrats to oppose that, but they won't have the votes to stop it. at the press conference this week, it was pointed out that the State Board of Education has already passed a ban on that, on critical race theory. And, and people say that that's not taught in Alabama public schools anyway. But the legislature supporting that said we want a law in place because the state board could always change their mind, and so they're going to pursue a bill on that.
So we know that's been a hot issue, and people will be wanting to follow that one. So let's talk about, I think you were just about to, but let's talk then about the medical treatments for transgender minors.
Okay, that got a lot of attention last year, but it did not pass. It passed the Senate, did not pass the House. There were, several public hearings. There were several rallies of parents of transgender teens, and some transgender teens and young adults came to the State House. Doctors opposed that bill. Some doctors supported the bill. That, as I said, got a lot of attention last year. It's already been pre-filed. I would expect it'll have a good chance to pass this year, but it didn't get all the way through the process last year. And there's some organized opposition to it. The Alabama chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics opposes that bill, and some others oppose it. So it's a controversial issue, and unclear whether it will pass or not, but it'll definitely, I would say it will most likely get a lot of discussion again.
So we know that the legislative session starts on Tuesday. How long does it last, Mike?
They can go up to 15 weeks. And they usually meet 2-3 days a week, but total of 15 weeks.
So again, that puts them finishing up before those primaries. And again, this is an election year for everybody in the legislature. All of those seats are up for grabs. So just another reminder for you to get to know your legislator, get to know your district. And again, everybody is going to be facing an election this year. So Mike, I know it's going to be a busy year for you, not only covering the session, but also covering all of these races. So thank you for giving us a little bit of a preview today on what we can expect starting on Tuesday. And I am sure next week you will be giving us all of that information on AL.com.
Thanks. Thanks, Ivana. Thanks a lot for having me.
Mike, thank you so much. Good luck next week. And everybody watching, thank you so much. And we will see you on Monday.